I'm very honored to be here because I am such a Hilary Mantel fan. Hilary Mantel, as all of you know, is known to us basically because of Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies. Together, they have sold over 3 million copies and been translated into 36 languages. She is now working on the final concluding volume of the trilogy, The Mirror and the Light. Jeremy Herrin is making his Broadway and New York City debut as a director with Wolf Hall Part 1 and 2. He directed the premiere of Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies for the Royal Shakespeare Company and its transfer to the West End of London, for which he won the 2014 Evening Standard Award for Best Director. Jeremy is the artistic director of Headlong Theatre in London. Wolf Hall Parts 1 and 2, which are based on the best-selling novels, will arrive on Broadway on March 20th at the Winter Garden Theatre. It comes here after critically acclaimed, sold-out performances at the Royal Shakespeare Company and London's West End. Please welcome Dame Hilary Mantel and Jeremy Herrin. Hilary, I read a quote that I hope is accurate, that when you won your Man Booker prizes, you were asked what you were going to do with the prize money, and you said that you would spend it on sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And I was wondering how that was going.
Well, judge for yourself. You see my ravaged countenance.
Jeremy, did you know the books before? Well, Jeremy, you've been working on these plays for years and years. Did you know the books before you started the play?
I'd read Wolf Hall and enjoyed it on a holiday in about 2009, I think. Were they published in 2008?
No, 2009.
2009.
Okay.
So I read them that summer. Well, read the first one that summer and just loved it and didn't for one second imagine it as an adaptation. I just entered into Thomas's mind and Hilary's world and lost myself in it. And so when the idea of directing the adaptations came up, I said yes immediately, and then very quickly read Bring Up the Bodies before meeting Hilary, and found that easily as good.
Hilary, your dialogue, which is of course based in the 16th century, is so strikingly contemporary and vibrant. Is that achieved through a process of elimination of the, things, for instance, like avoiding my liege, which I always find hard to get over? It is always like you're reading about something that happened a week and a half ago rather than in the 1500s.
Well, what I try to do, if I can find exact words from a contemporary text, I try to take those as the basis. It gives me a peculiar pleasure to be using someone's real words. But then I have to do something interesting, because I have to take my own dialogue and smooth the two together so that no one can see the join. And what this means, I think, is I'm intent on avoiding pastiche. I don't want us to sound as if we're in a historical novel. But I'm very aware that to the people living their lives, they weren't speaking in a consciously archaic way. They were speaking their everyday language. And that may seem the most simple point, but it's something an author has to bear in mind. So it means really not reproducing an idiom, but inventing one. A voice for the characters, a voice for the book, which nods to Tudor-inflected English, but it doesn't make a fetish of authenticity. The main thing is clarity of communication.
Why do you think audiences have responded so overwhelmingly to both books and Thomas Cromwell as a character? Because, frankly, I knew very little about him before the book.
Sure.
But he was portrayed in a rather thuggish manner, and you've made him such a swell guy.
Well, I'm not sure that's quite true. But what he is, he's a hero for our time. We are a little tired of moral certainties. We can live with the equivocal man. We can live with a degree of ambivalence. When I came to Cromwell, I guess I was as influenced as much as anybody by his popular reputation, which is black. What I wanted to do was not rehabilitate him. I wanted to explore him. I was curious. And when I began work on my own account, trying to push aside all my preconceptions, I found the truth very much more complex than I'd been prepared for. Hence, 3 books. It started off as 1.
Which brings me to my next question.
Yeah.
The 3rd book, Thomas Cromwell having died after the 2nd book, will it be about Henry VIII?
No, the 3rd book is The Mirror and the Light. It's the continuation of Thomas Cromwell's story. Bring Up the Bodies, the 2nd book in the trilogy, takes us to the death of Anne Boleyn. So it takes us to 1536. Cromwell has 4 more years to live and thrive. And the book is not, as some people think, about his fall. It's about his rise and rise to a position of power that, a concentration of power in his hands that has seldom been held in those days by anyone other than a king. And then a sudden fall and death at the hands of Henry's headsman in 1540. So that is the trajectory of The Mirror and the Light. But I don't like to describe it as the conclusion to his story. We have a long, long way to climb yet. And he is, in a sense, he's climbing and climbing. You can't stay still. The top of the ladder is in sight. What is he going to do when he gets there? You can't balance. People are shaking the ladder below. What do? Do you jump? That is the question that I hope will keep my reader intrigued.
And you're presently at work on this 3rd volume.
Yes, I am.
I had read that it was being released this year. I was hoping.
Absolutely not. Well, unless there's something they're not telling me. No. Unless someone has come up with their own version. But no, I've quite a bit of work left to do. A novel is an inherently unpredictable thing. It's hard in these circumstances, knowing that kind readers are waiting for it. It's hard not to feel pushed, but I'm determined not to be pushed because a great deal rests on this. It's a 10-year project for me, and it's the central project of my life. I have to bring it home. It's got to be right. It's called The Mirror and the Light because it mirrors. It holds up a mirror to what has gone before, and it casts new light on what has gone before. So the 3 books have to work together as a room full of reflections. It's intricate, therefore, and on it will rest, I hope, another TV series, 3rd play. If I don't do it right, then no one is going to compensate for my mistakes. So I work on it every day. I wrote a few lines before I came out this evening. I never let a day go. It's always present in my mind. The characters are as close to me as you and Jeremy. But it's just an enterprise. It's got to take its time. I hope to go back and get a good summer's work in. And at the end of that, I'll have more of a notion of where I am. People think I'm evasive from Weasley because I won't say where I am up to. But the thing is, I don't write sequentially. So I'm up to half a dozen.
How do you mean?
Well, I write in scenes and I put it together like a collage, and I don't decide the order in which I'll narrate events until quite a late stage. So, you know, I may be writing several different parts of the book at one time. I cannot, you know, march through date by date, month by month. That's not the way fiction works for me. And whether it's contemporary fiction or historical fiction, I've always worked that way. So the answer to where are you up to is I am up to 6 different places and 6 different dates. And therefore, it's only in the last few months of writing it begins to fall into place very quickly.
Do you have a specific or eccentric work process that are you very rigid about the amount of hours you work? It sounds like it's rather scattershot just from what you said.
Well, I don't really understand this thing about writing routines and so many words a day. And, you know, I just write all the time. When I'm not writing in my notebook, I'm writing in my head. So I don't really understand how writers have a life and a work. For me, it's all just the same thing. And I'm continually generating material, whether it's for the Mirror and the Light or other projects I have on hand. So talking about, I regard it actually, this sounds grim, but it's a 7-day-a-week, 24-hour-a-day job. And I wonder, when people so much want to become writers, do they know that? Nobody gives you a holiday. You take your sensibility with you everywhere. That doesn't mean it's any kind of hardship at all. I can't imagine what life would be like if it were any other than that. But to call it a full-time trade is an understatement, I think.
Did both of you know what you wanted to do from a very early age?
As a teenager, I thought I was going to be an actor, and I had a very kind and generous teacher who thought that I wouldn't be any much better than a mediocre actor and suggested that I might be a decent director. So he gave me an opportunity to direct a play, which I loved immediately.
Did you have to dumb down the plays for America? Just
Dumb them down? Certainly
Yes.
not.
Well, you know, it has happened.
No, I think...
I hope we've smartened them up,
Yeah.
actually.
I hope so.
You're too kind.
I think that would be a mistake, wouldn't it? Broadway has a fantastic tradition for the most serious drama. It's a kind of commercial sphere in lots of ways, and yet some of the greatest plays in English have been performed there. So it would be a mistake on our part to think that we knew more about it rather than bringing our material for an engagement, an equal engagement with our audiences here.
Was dramaturgy a major part of your rehearsal process in terms of, or being English, your actors just know how people were in the 1500s?
They're all exactly the same now. Some of the footwear has got a little bit more comfortable, but generally they're the same. There's 2 questions in there, isn't there? There was a lot of dramaturgy in the rehearsal process because these books are so vast, and the interior life of Thomas in particular, and the rest of the characters is exactly bespoke for a novel. So therefore, to take to transfer those to the medium of the stage requires making lots of choices. And so it was about that, really. It was about what part of the story do we include? How do we transfer and support Thomas's arc with a limitation on hours and number of people? And how can we do that wittily and in an engaging way? And it's a constant process of refinement. You know that wonderful quote that there's no work of art is ever finished, only abandoned. That's, I mean, we're a case in point in that we've had 3.5 weeks of rehearsal in London, and now we're here. And we're going to keep working up until the last minute, because there's always new discoveries to make. There's always a way to compress that bit of story and to find a moment that's delightful here. And we're in a different space, and we're talking to different audiences. So there'll be a lot of to and fro.
It is a unique project, really, because normally when a work is dramatised, that work is finished. But this is 2 parts of a trilogy. The background work is ongoing, it's changing all the time. The actors, what they do changes what's in the 3rd book. What's in the 3rd book changes the script. It's an incredibly fluid and creative process, which requires everybody, but mainly Jeremy, to keep their nerve. And it has required great patience and commitment and flexibility from our cast. But there is a sense that it is super live, because we're thinking and working on it all the time. And to come here and to have a chance to rehearse again, to move into a new space, to think freshly, well, it's just a joy for all of us.
It's the play that I saw in London, where the productions were visually very stunning. Were there paintings that you gave your team to use as references, or I assume that they came with their own specific points of reference? But it's a very beautiful production.
Thank you. Yes, there's a really wonderful creative team. Lots of Tony Award winners, actually, in the design team. I'm the junior member of the creatives, in that this is my debut. And the rest of them are Oscar winners and Tony winners. And so, you know, I feel very lucky to work with such brilliant colleagues. And what was wonderful about the whole thing is that it's eminently researchable. You know, there's a small amount of material, but it's really rich. The Holbein portraits. I can't wait to go and have a look at the originals in the Frick that we're going to go tomorrow, which is just a great treat. So we talk about, you know, audiences dumbing down, but it feels like New York has got access to this culture in a way that lots of people in London can only dream of. So it's a feast for research, and the great thing about it is that, unlike an adaptation of a literary novel, where you're second guessing a gesture of respect to a writer that isn't there, we've had Hilary along with us all the time. And Hilary is the kind of one of the bravest artists I've ever worked with, and she's constantly reinventing, constantly challenging her own assumptions and taking us all with her on this magnificent creative journey. So, as she says, it's never boring, but it's always a multi-dimensional creative process.
Hilary, how did you stumble upon Thomas Cromwell as a character and the Tudor age? Because haven't you done 10 books before, or 9? Many books.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, a lot of books. Yeah. Well, I started off as a historical novelist. The first book I wrote, actually, was a huge historical novel. It wasn't published first. But the process of research was not strange to me. I had wanted to write about Thomas Cromwell for, more than 30 years. When I began writing at first, I began work on a novel about the French Revolution. I saw myself as a historical novelist, And I thought, when I've dispatched this little lot to the guillotine, I will then turn to the Tudors, and I will do Thomas Cromwell. Well, a lot of life and a lot of writing got in between. And then, you know, when you have a career running, your publisher wants a book. Well, they want you to check in every so often with something. And I had to get to a situation where I could say, no, I'm going away for a while and I'll be back in about 4 years. I had to wait for that to be possible. And I had to get my nerve up as well, because I'd become a kind of 18th century specialist. I'd written 2 novels set in the 18th century. I'd done a lot of non-fiction writing around them. And I had to go away and learn a whole new period. And that meant real, total immersion in it. Cromwell, you see, seemed to me to be the missing piece of a jigsaw puzzle. You have the story of Henry and his wives and his court told and retold and retold, and yet it doesn't, for me, quite hang together. There's a vacuum, there's a black hole, there's something missing. There's a kind of moving mass of darkness at the center, and that is where Thomas Cromwell is. And this story is missing from fiction. It's largely missing from drama. He's just a villain lurking in the wings in a black cloak. And I wanted to bring him into a good light and see what was going on there. Now, when you step into that space, it is Thomas Cromwell. This very familiar story defamiliarizes itself. Everything looks different when seen through his eyes. So I didn't really hesitate in going to my publisher and saying, okay, there are shelves full of books, libraries full of novels about the Tudors. This one is different. I had no conception of what lay ahead. I had no idea that it would make an appeal to millions of readers, but I was convinced that I had a good story to tell.
The book had a readership of approximately 3 million, which is vast and translated into 36 languages. So you've really tapped into the tip of the global intelligence, which sounds vast until you realize that there are 7.5 billion people. So it's sort of a drop in the population bucket. Do you ever feel it as a response?
Plus, you know, 3 million sales doesn't equal 3 million readers. I mean, it might be just...
Oh, no.
might be about 30 of them out there.
Yes.
Holding up a torch for it.
I think every book is read by 4 or 5 people at least. I think you could quadruple the 3 million. But it seems like you could sort of show us all the way with your books. We've learned so much because of Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies, so much about England and what made England what it is. It's a great gift, and you deserve your damehood very, very deeply.
Thank you.
And speaking of your damehood, just as an American, and you know, we don't know about these kind of things, is it a big whoop? Is it just fantastic, or is it humbling? Because obviously, I know you went through a tiny socialist period, so you would sort of, I would imagine, discard honors of any nature. But I just think to be introduced as Dame or Sir anyone would be a very big deal.
Isn't it grand? Yeah. It stops the traffic, it really does. You have a decision to make about this. This award is Our honour system essentially is attached to an archaic vocabulary, whereby we are dames and sirs and we belong to the order of the British Empire, and it's all a little equivocal. A few years ago, I was created CBE, which is one rung down the ladder, if you like. They write to you and they say, if we were minded to offer it, would you accept it? Because they don't want any embarrassment, you see. So I rang up my most left-wing friend and said, now look, you are my outboard conscience. What do I do? And she said, go for it, go for it. And actually, it gives people a lot of pleasure and a lot of fun.
Oh.
And then, you know, once you've set your foot on the ladder, I mean, it would be kind of grotesquely self-important to say, no, I refuse, I want to stand back from this. So, yes, it did give me great pleasure to become Dame Hill. Everyone thinks it's a huge joke.
Oh, I don't
adds
think
to
they
the gaiety
do.
of nations.
I knew men who were in film, and they were very old friends, but they had a duel to the death over who would be knighted first. And the one who lost just went with his tail between his legs and slunk off in shame. So it's, and these were very intelligent and very talented men.
Name names.
No longer with us.
Okay.
Will we be calling you Baroness Hilary Mantel at any point in the future? Because that seems the top of the ladder there.
No, that's on quite a separate track.
I see.
Unless I were a major donor to a political party, which I am not, I don't think they'll be promoting me to the House of Lords.
Jeremy, you are having previews of Wolf Hall, which surprised me because your cast has been playing this for the last months to great acclaim. But you said that the Winter Garden is a totally different theater, different animal. How have you had to accommodate that theater?
Well, it's a huge space with an enormous proscenium arch, probably about at least 2.5 times the size of this space here, which is huge for our show. When we played in the Aldwych, it was probably a similar size to this, but deeper. So we've had to recalibrate the show in a fantastic way. We've built out the most magnificent set by Christopher Oram, and we've built out into the auditorium these magnificent steps. So what we've got is an enormous stage space that we can do lots of lovely pictorial mise en scène. And also we've got a space more or less in the middle of the room where we can do intimate two-handed scenes. So as far as I'm concerned, it's the best of both of the versions that we've done before. We played in the Jacobean Theatre in Stratford called the Swan, which is probably about 450 seats. The Aldwych, which is a big Victorian proscenium house. And now I think this is going to be our best version yet.
It's glorious. I was in there yesterday and I was amazed. I've never been in theatre like that, which is so vast and yet so embracing. And my feeling going up into the galleries was that all parts have contact with the stage. You know, there are some theatres that are so high that you feel you're in a different climate zone, and you really, you lose contact. You may have a good view, the sound may be good, but there's no quality of intimacy. I'm so excited about this move because, as Jeremy says, I think it should give us the best of both worlds.
Are you have your same creative team designing here. Has it given them a chance to expand and incorporate the damask in the background of the Holbein, for example?
I suppose so. I mean, it's more of a case of how do we, what of our principles still work, and then how do we translate them into that space? I'm a real believer in the theatre being a thing that happens on that evening with that group of people. So that shows can be different from night to night. They should be alive. They're sort of organisms. They're ecosystems that the parts talk to each other in a subtly different way. And I'm always very fearful of working on a show and ossifying it, killing it through repetition, through a kind of a lack of inner life. And you'll know yourself as an actor, sometimes you've just got to be patient and you've got to do the groundwork, haven't you? And then that moment of inspiration, that moment of connection, that moment of truth just appears. And I suppose what's the privilege with this material is that now as an ensemble, as an acting company, and I would struggle to think of a better ensemble, they're so alive to the nuances of the story, how Hilary's writing is translated onto the stage, and they can make it up on any given evening, which means that an audience is entirely empowered in that experience. It's being made for them then and there, and it's a thrilling result when we get it right.
And imagine what that does for me as a writer, carrying these characters on into the second book, because it is as if I am eavesdropping. These interactions, as Jeremy says, they're not fixed, they're fluid. There is a quality of spontaneity, and it is as if it were all to be played for all over again. The dead hand of determinism has gone, it's been lifted off it. This is what I've aimed to do in my books, so that the reader walks forward with the characters who are ignorant of their own fate, who have not read their own story, who don't know what's around the corner. So, although much about a production must be fixed and determined, there is a way of turning your actors loose and making them free, just as there's a way of making your characters free within a book. And I think we've shared that aspiration to find that. And for a historical novelist, to watch your work performed in this way reminds you all the time of the vital thing, that history could have been different. At any moment, a person could have said or done something that changed the course of everything, and a great cascade of consequences goes on down the generations. And although, again, it may seem a simple point, I always want to make my reader conscious of this, that they cannot, they're not people in history, they are people in their lives. They are our contemporaries. So the chance to be part of a live show is, it's an inspiration and it's an education too.
Jeremy, is it very different directing a historical drama? Do you feel more restricted by being faithful to the period, by the behavior, or you're just trying to get to the honesty of the situation?
I think it's the latter. You're just always trying to dig into what makes these people tick, what they're terrified of, how they need to survive, and most stories boil down to that. I suppose, I think if Hilary wasn't around, it would have been much more stressful dealing with the kind of dead hand of history and the people who know better in the auditorium coming to judge the work. But because Hilary's done years and years of work on it, she could, I used to joke in Stratford that she could spot a bad prop at 100 paces. She could just go, nope, that's not right. And so, we had our sort of inbuilt monitor with us, which just freed everybody up. So we didn't feel beholden to or intimidated by history, and we didn't feel worried about the letter of the novels, because Hilary was giving us permission and guiding our path towards the spirit of them and the truth of them. So that was all good. And I think fundamentally, stories on stage boil down to, you know, what the conflict is, what is the obstacle for that character, how much wit have they got to find a different way around a particular problem, and how do you stage it, and what the dynamic is with that group of people. And it comes down to simple chunks of dramatic life.
The circumstances are very particular, but the way that the circumstances play out is universal and is recognized by everybody.
Well, no, and also with the kinds of television shows that have been produced in America that have become very successful here. The Sopranos is perhaps an extreme example,
Yes.
but House of Cards, we've shown characters and sort of embraced characters that have many colors, and which might have prepared audiences to embrace a man with the complication of Thomas Cromwell.
Yes, and it's best thought of really as akin to a contemporary political thriller.
I mean, certainly that was my background. The show that I directed before Wolf Hall, that I think put me in the running for the job, was a show about the 1970s minority government politics in Britain, which everybody thought was a very undramatic starting point for a show, but it turned into a sensational show because I think survival is the story, isn't it? What are we prepared to do to survive? And I think maybe rather than the culture giving itself permission to enjoy these anti-heroes, I think these anti-heroes express what it's like to be alive now, that life is complicated, survival is challenging. All of us, we are large, we contain multitudes, we're all sorts of different people at any one time. So someone like Cromwell, who's properly dimensional, very layered, his worldview is very enigmatic. On the one hand, he's a family man, he's a sensitive guide to young men. On the other hand, he's a bully and a tease, and he's nefarious. His true character lies in between those points.
And he's worldly. He's much worldlier than anyone in Henry's court. He's
Yes.
multilingual. He's lived in France and fought, and he's a wonderful character. And just
Well, he's an enigma. No one quite knows where he's been, who he knows, what he's seen, and he keeps it that way because that's the source of his power. It's hidden in his sleeve. He doesn't apologize, he doesn't explain. He allows people to attribute to him what they will, and that is the source of his power. To transform this for the stage has been an interesting task because the books are told from a position behind Cromwell's eyes. And we had to find ways of expressing that outwardly without soliloquies.
the scenes that I found had such a delicacy and an honesty were the scenes with his wife when they were talking, just the two of them in their bedroom, and there was, I just found it completely compelling the way you wrote the two of them together, and just so loving and so compassionate of each other. It was one of, I think it's one of the surprises of the book for a character that's so huge historically, that you were given access to a moment of such intimacy with his wife.
There is a sort of tragedy underlying his political career in that he lost his wife and his two daughters within a couple of years of each other, or maybe the same year, we can't be entirely sure, in one of the summer epidemics that swept through London at that time. And our starting point almost is the destruction of his ego and of his world, he comes to a very low point where he has lost most of his family, and his patron, Cardinal Wolsey, has been brought down politically and then destroyed. And it's simply the story of a man who hits rock bottom and then has to bounce. And it is, on a human level, a situation that all of us recognize.
Jeremy, was casting different than any other casting process on this?
I mean, I hesitate to say that it's different because, as far as I'm concerned, it's always the most important thing that I do as a director. If you get that right, then the quality of your work, the experience of your work is different. A lot of the time, if you miscast something, then you declare what your job is going to be for the next few weeks. Is you try and negotiate and make the show work around that person who, through no fault of their own, only through a lack of judgment from the director, you've put in the wrong role at the wrong time. So, I mean, it's always lots of pressure to get it right. I suppose there was a bit more pressure on this because as soon as we said we were going to do it, then the papers were full of who's going to play Thomas Cromwell. And so that felt exciting, actually. I embraced that sort of pressure. And we hit the jackpot. We cast an actor called Ben Miles, who I suppose in some ways doesn't have the physical attributes that Cromwell has in the books, and yet he's Thomas Cromwell. He's great. He's really does a fantastic job. And crucially, he's got the heart of a lion, and he's full of guts, and he carries the ensemble through 2 shows in a magnificent and towering way.
The cast is flawless. Not a weak link in, I mean, just outstanding cast. I think we might be going to Q&A now. Is there anyone backstage has the questions? Or shall I just ask you to shout them out?
So have people submitted questions?
Yes, they have, but,
Right.
but I don't have them.
Okay.
So,
We've got all evening. We'll wait. It's fine.
Here we are.
great. As if by magic. Thank you. Just, would you be able to give us an estimate of how much of Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies is derived from the historical record and how much from your imagination? And yet, we sort of...
Oh, I would say 78.9%. It's the question. The answer is as much as possible. But what is a historical record? How reliable, how authoritative, how complete is a historical record? There is no answer to that. One of the things the books do, and the plays do it too, is explore the status of evidence, the question of how we know what we think we know. Evidence that the documents one might use vary from an ambassador's offhand report of a bit of gossip translated from another language to a parliamentary statute, to the incomplete records of court proceedings, at every stage in between. So what I do is I read as widely as possible. I try to go back to source. I don't take the word of historians. I read as close to contemporary sources as I can. I try to evaluate, I try to run up the competing claims of different sources, and then in the end I make some choices. And where the record is effaced or erased or incomplete, well, that's where I earn my money. That's where imagination goes to work. But, you know, you have to build on the basis of the best evidence you can get. And if you do that, then your imagination, in a way, is guided. It's an imperfect world for the historian as well as the historical novelist. There is the record, there are the sources, there are the facts, and there's the great marshy ground of interpretation, which is where we all build our shaky houses.
I was going to ask you, and I'm afraid you're going to say none, how many research assistants you have?
No, I don't know how people do that. How do you know what you need to know until you come across it? And, you know, the whole joy of research is that you turn up the strangest things. You go in pursuit of one thing, you come back with something quite other that illuminates a part of the book that, you know, that you had not thought of. It's a devious process. It's an intricate process. I don't see how you can delegate it. It would be like if our actors were replaced by puppets, you know? If you were to employ a researcher and say, this is my list of what I need to know, I have to do it myself. I mean, it is just as creative as the writing itself.
This is a question from a woman from Cambridge, England, Emma Rees. Which of your characters do you have the most intimate relationship with, and why?
I wonder, does the questioner mean within these books or in general? I find that I am much, much closer to the real people I write about. The imaginary people, the people I've invented, don't have the same claim on my heart or my brain. I think that probably, you know, a mistake people make or an assumption they make is they say, for instance, well, isn't it going to be hard when you kill off Thomas Cromwell? Won't you miss him? But I know that man. They will strike off his head and he will get up and he will put it on again. And there he will be on stage or on screen. My first novel, as I said to you, was about the French Revolution, and it ends neatly with most of the cast decapitated. I have a penchant for this sort of thing. But that doesn't mean they were dead. A moment later, they were alive again as the book went out to the readers, and they live still in people's imaginations. That, I think, is the difference in writing about people who are real, just as real as we are, but they just happen to be dead.
It answered this question, which is a lovely question. I feel bereft at the thought that in the next book, Thomas will die. What are you feeling about that? Well, we're all going to miss him desperately. This is a question for Jeremy from Neil Bradley. The biggest challenge is to bring a production this size to Broadway.
Maintaining the integrity of the story and not getting hyped up by all the fuss outside the production. I think it's really important that that you start again every technical session, every rehearsal, every performance. You start again with the basic tenets, which is what is the truth of the story in this moment, and to communicate that cleanly and with wit to our audience, and not to be carried away. The only reason we were successful in Stratford and again in London was because we held those principles very dear, and we're determined to do the same here.
This is for you, Hilary, is your writing of the mirror and the light influenced by the way events and people are portrayed in theaters and television?
Not in the way people imagine. Sometimes it's assumed that having an actor physically embody your characters is a great problem for you. But it's not really like that, because you think of your characters as an energy, or at least that's the way I think of them. And their form is protean. I don't feel limited in any way, because Mark Rylance has been cast as Thomas Cromwell on television, or Ben Miles on stage. Rather, they illuminate aspects of the character for me. It's much less about physical appearance than people think. What has happened for me? As far as the TV productions were concerned, I had input to the script, but then I left it alone. It happened without my, I visited the set. At one point, I got in a traffic jam with my own convoy. Half the West Country ground to a halt as it made its way from one location to another through the narrow lanes of Wiltshire. And I thought, what have I done? It was like walking into a war. But all that happened, and suddenly it was on the screen. As we've said, the stage, this has been a very different process for me, where I've been very much part of the team and on the inside of it. And there has been a really fluid interplay between the two. It has only been of benefit to me to be pinned to the moment by watching live performance, by remembering that none of this is predetermined. This is just people living their lives. And also, frankly, because there has been, the cast has so inspired me. Sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, sometimes discussions we've had, questions even that have made me really think, and sometimes little things that people have done. I've said, why? What was happening there? You didn't do that last night. What was happening? The answer can be absolutely illuminating. Through my mind at that moment passed something that to me is quite unexpected, that floods the whole thing with light. And I try to take advantage of that. You see, I'm not alone with the project anymore. I have these people to co-imagine with me. And it is that important, and it's changed. It has changed my writing, and it's changed, I suppose, the kind of writer I will be in the future, but not in the simple and obvious way people think. It's not a case of the book being manipulated by the play or the play by the book. It's a creative exchange.
I do have to say, for such an intelligent audience, there's quite a paucity of questions. But is anybody want to raise their hand? Because otherwise, you, sir.
I've got one for each of you.
Why didn't you write them on a card? I see.
So for Jeremy, there is the BBC miniseries version. Do you ever look at that and say, oh, well, that's kind of interesting, that maybe we can do something with that, or you look at it and say, total rubbish. And then for Hilary, much of what you said about Cromwell could, to some extent, also be said about Wolsey. So what is it about Cromwell that attracted you more than focusing on Wolsey?
Could everybody,
It was great. He's written it down. You can have a look at it later.
Jeremy, do you want to just repeat
Yeah, I'll
the
do.
question?
You were asking, weren't you, whether I'd seen the BBC television adaptation and whether I'd taken any sustenance or inspiration or even rejected any of the ideas in that. That was the question, wasn't it? I haven't seen it. So, Hilary's question. I haven't seen it only because I've been particularly busy, and I thought I've got a strong sense about what our stage productions are and how they work and the sort of language that we use, and I didn't want anything to get in the way. Bless you. Get in the way of that. But I'm really looking forward to watching them after we've done this process.
They are totally different in spirit. The TV production is very good indeed, but it uses and exploits the beauties and pleasures of that medium, which is very different from live theatre. There are different storylines, there's a different feel to it. There are endless storylines to select from in the book. Different characters, different locations, some things that TV can do superbly, and some things TV cannot do at all. So I don't feel myself that there's any need to compare. And I think of them both not as adaptations, but as new works. I think that's the best way to look at it, that spring from a common source. But this gentleman's question to me was why Cromwell and not Wolsey? It's about finding a satisfactory story arc, I think. Wolsey's career was a matter of 20-odd years, and it ended badly, but in a way that is not, I may say, as satisfactory to the reader as a good decapitation on Tower Hill. When I audition my characters for a historical novel, my first question is, do they cut your head off? If the answer is yes, we may be able to work together. I love Wolsey. I adore him. And I did not know this when I began the books. Because again, he's been very ill-served by biographers. He's been very much out of fashion. He arrived in the second chapter. He sat down and he began to talk, and the book opened up, and it was pure pleasure. I felt I was just listening to him. And the problem was then he wouldn't go. And my idea was, you know, we sweep the cardinal out of the story within 50 pages. But no, he has a way of dominating the early part of Cromwell's story. He was a flamboyant, charismatic, very clever man. And I think a good subject, a wonderful subject for a biographer, less satisfactory in the shape of his career for a novelist.
Excellent questions. Guys, really, there's 4 questions in these. This is not acceptable. Yes, ma'am.
I have a similar question because what got blown out of the water for me was Thomas More. I think most of us were sort of raised on him after all seasons. And it was a very shocking character for Wolf Hall, so I'd like you to talk about that a little bit.
Yes, my portrayal of Thomas More has caused a great deal of controversy. And I was asked by readers when Wolf Hall came out if I had made up Thomas More's record as a heresy hunter. And I had to say, well, no, it's all perfectly well documented. Go to the sources. A Man for All Seasons has dominated our imaginations for some generations now. It was a marvelous stage play, a wonderful film, and unfortunately, its portrayal of Thomas More as a 1960s liberal was deeply unconvincing at the time, and it needed a rethink, simple as that. And, you know, people have said to me, well, More was a man of his time, his beliefs were sincere, he did what other men of his time did in pursuing those whose opinions he thought threatened the unity of Christendom. I appreciate all that, but I will say that the zeal, fervour, and sheer pleasure with which he went about his work of imprisoning, burning people, shocked even his contemporaries. He was comprehensively trashed in the intellectual debates of the 1520s. His position was barely respectable, and he used his political position to bully people, frankly. I used to hold back on this and say, you know, in many ways, he was a great man. But the problem is, you can find yourself saying, yeah, he was a great man, except for the fact that he liked to burn people alive. You know, as if it was what he did when, as a sort of weekend hobby when the weather was wet. But you see, More himself saw it as central to his work. He was proud of his record as a heresy hunter. And I don't think contemporary morals and mores excuse him. Having said that, I do not think and I do not believe that I have portrayed him as a villain. I think I've respected him. I've respected the record. His final days are very well documented by himself. And I have used his own records. I've used his own words. I have given him some very sharp lines indeed. And I think I have done well by him. If my portrait is not sympathetic, it is at least deeply thought through and deeply felt. A novelist is not obliged to be impartial. A neutral novel would be a novel without fire in its belly. What I have tried to do is show how Thomas More might have looked if you were one of the people, one of the London evangelicals, if you were Thomas Cromwell and you were living in fear of him. So I've tried to root it in the experience of the time. I'm not in the business of judging people or employing hindsight so much as trying to render the lived experience of the time. And I think that though maybe people don't agree with my portrayal, I've done it with honorable intentions.
Oh, now you have questions. What? Sorry, where?
Way back here.
Yes, you, sorry.
Your voice in these two books moves effortlessly between present, past, future, first person, second person, third person, almost simultaneously. How did you come to that?
Really, the books are told not in the first person by Thomas Cromwell, but from behind his eyes. And I didn't know that was going to happen until I wrote the first paragraph. There's a way that all the big decisions about a book can be taken in a split second, almost before you know what tense, what person, what the manner of the narration will be. You wait to know. And when I wrote the first paragraph, the book begins with the words, so now get up. And this is Cromwell's father speaking. Cromwell is a boy of 15. He's lying on the ground. He's bleeding. His father is kicking him around the inn yard. Cromwell thinks, I may be about to die in the next minute. When I imagined that, I knew I had bookended the project. Because where will we be in the end? We will be on the floor thinking, I am going to die in the next minute. Then there was the little matter of what came in the middle. But the interesting thing was, where was I looking from and what was I looking at? I was looking at a boat and the twine that sews the boat together and a knot in the twine. The focus was intensely close. I couldn't see very much because there was blood in my eyes. However, the question was settled. What's the viewpoint? It is his. It's behind his eyes. When is this happening? It's happening now. So that answered the big questions. And the voice, I think, was there by the time I was 2 paragraphs in. It was an extraordinary thing. It took me by surprise. However, there's nothing mystical about it because, as I say, I had been thinking about these books for some 30 years, so I guess some organizing principle inside was working away without my knowledge.
Henry, you talk of writing as a 724 preoccupation. Has your husband ever felt jealous of Cromwell?
He's in the audience. We should ask him. I think he lives like all of us with a certain amount of sharp curiosity as to what Cromwell will do next.
Yes.
Dame Hilary, do you have any sense yet of what might come next for you? Will it be more decapitations, or you might be in the mood for a light contemporary comedy?
Well, while I've been working away, I have produced a book of short stories. That was a nice commercial, wasn't it? I have a couple of novels on hand. I think probably next up will be a book set in Africa in the late 70s, early 80s. I'm quite far on with that. I have a non-fiction project on hand. I want to write a little book about what we think we're doing when we create historical fiction or drama. And a couple of other fiction projects simmering away there. I would also like to write a play. I think, as I said earlier, the process of working with this team, Jeremy, the actors, letting me onto the inside of this process has changed my vision of what I might want to do for the future. However, well, you know what I'm going to say. Everything now depends on successfully bringing the trilogy home. So that fills my vision at the moment.
Oh. Yes, and thank you for asking for recognition. So, yes, yes.
Okay, I'm going to take it back to Anne Boleyn, and there's been a lot in the historical, Susanna Lipscomb, Alison Weir, that she really was quite innocent. And you said recently in BBC History magazine that she wasn't a victim, and that she was playing a very political game and won a crown, and that eventually she lost. But what do you really think of her? I mean, in The Wolf Hall, she's at a TV adaptation. She's not a very sympathetic character. But how do you take on her? What's out there now?
Hillary,
We
just
have a
repeat
line.
the question.
I'm sorry, could you hear the question? This lady is asking for my take on Anne Boleyn. And you used two very interesting words there, innocence and victim. And as you say, I have said she was not a victim. But innocent and victim do not necessarily make a pair. You can be a guilty victim, or you can be guilty and not a victim. I don't think Anne was a victim. I think she was a player. I credit her with brains, wit, courage, as Thomas Cromwell did himself. He liked a worthy opponent. And he said that in the last few days of her life, the Queen is as brave as the lion. The question of her guilt or innocence of the charges of treason, I think, is one that I would not care to have to determine. There is a moment in the play when Cromwell is asked, are they really guilty? And I don't mean what did the court find, I mean, did they do it? And he says, this is why. We have judges and juries and courts of law to save us from the tyranny of one man's opinion. It's a lawyer's answer, but it's also a historian's answer. You tell this story again and again and again to yourself. You write it every way you can think of. And at the end, you still don't understand it. Something's missing, so you have another go. And something is still missing. My method has been to leave certain questions unresolved because I feel that's the honest way. And in a sense, my opinion doesn't matter. What matters is, how did it feel to be caught up in the events of those days?
I'm sorry, but we're going to have to call this to a close. Let's thank Hilary Mantel and Jeremy Payne. You can go.
Thank you very much.